Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another SACPA session. I hope you're having a good morning. SACPA acknowledges that this event takes place on the land of the Blackfoot people and Métis Nations of Alberta Region 3, and we pay respect to their past, present, and future cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationships to the land. SACPA would also like to thank our continuing support that we receive from the University of Lethbridge, Shaw Spotlight, and the Lethbridge Herald. Today we have with us Nathan Neudorf. Nathan Neudorf was elected as a member of the Legislative Assembly of Alberta for Lethbridge East on April 16th, 2019. That was quite the day. Nathan currently chairs the Standing Committee on Alberta's economic future and also sits on the Standing Committee of Public Accounts, Family and Communities, and Special Standing Committee on Members' Services. Additionally, Nathan is the provincial representative to the Council of State Governments Midwest and West. Thank you very much for joining us today, Nathan, and we very much look forward to your talk.
Thank you so much, Annalise. Good morning, everyone. My name is Nathan Neudorf. I'm the MLA for Lethbridge East. And I would like to very especially thank SACPA, Knud, and Annalise for inviting me to this session. I do appreciate all the work that they do. So, and for the invitation today. And thank you to all of you who have joined us today. I appreciate you taking time out of your schedules to listen to this, and hopefully I'll be able to provide some information for you and look forward to some questions and answer time at the end. Annalise, if you could put up the first slide, please. So today's topic is the post-pandemic recovery and what are the main issues facing Alberta. As you can well imagine, there are many. The last 13 months has been incredibly challenging for all of us. There are social impacts, there's economic impacts, and there's a polarization of views upon restrictions and how we manage our COVID response. We can't discuss all of these topics and all of these issues today. We just don't have the time. Thankfully, Knud has provided some scope for our discussion today. And with that, Annalise, if you could go to the next slide. So this next slide, just for my benefit, I am just getting a reminder, so I apologize. This is my first time doing this, and I want to make sure I'm on the right slide myself. Today's plan is we're going to talk about tabling a budget in a global pandemic, the plan forward, job creation and strategic investment, COVID numbers and vaccines, and then, like I said, a time for questions at the end. So when we discuss the budget, we will look at a little bit the debt, the deficit, and stabilization and those topics and discuss those a little bit. In the plan forward, I will talk a little bit more about economic recovery and the strategic part of our investment, both provincially and what it means for Lethbridge and area. And finally, I'll have just a very quick snapshot of some of our COVID numbers as recently as I think April 27th, which is what I had the numbers when we prepared the slides, and the vaccines and what that means for us here in Lethbridge. If we could go, Annalise, to the next slide, please. So this is the budget. I don't have this slide, unfortunately, but I might just pull it up so I can tell people what I'm talking about. On the bottom of this slide, you will see the previous year's budget and the forecast numbers. And they're forecast numbers because that year end has not yet been audited and reported. But you can see where we started the year, hopefully with a budget of 57.3 billion, revenue of about 50 billion, leaving a deficit of 7.3 billion, and the debt was sitting at about 77. And once we hit the pandemic, we also at that time, if you recall, we had that global fight on the price of oil, which really changed the entire market. And then the resulting combination of those two things showed up in a massive economic contraction, and the forecast year-end numbers, you can just see how the expenses went up in response. Revenue went down, obviously resulting in a larger deficit and debt. And that was 2020. this year's budget is in the top portion of your screen, and you can see how we still have that elevated expense projection in our budget, mostly to do with the COVID response. And I'll get into some specifics on that number in a moment. And again, we see that revenue has not come up and returned to what is much more normal for Alberta. The past few years, it's been between 48 billion and 50 billion. Typically, you can still see the numbers are down, maybe up a little bit from last year, as we've seen some positive numbers on our oil prices. I believe the current price for West Texas Intermediate is around $67 or $68 a barrel. But again, this challenge still presents us with a large deficit of 18.2 billion. And we just see that debt increasing over the $100 billion mark to $115.8 billion. Next slide, please, Annalise. Thank you very much for that. So here we're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into some of these numbers. And I'm actually going to start on the second slide first, if you don't mind. The healthcare spending is a record $23 billion. The reason I want to start with this is in a pandemic and with a response, I think it's appropriate that that is our number one priority. Is everything okay, Annalise? I just see some. It should be slide 4, healthcare spending, record 23 billion.
I think you and I have a different slideshow.
Okay.
My slide 4 is the budget, and my slide 5 is tabling a budget in COVID pandemic.
Okay, go to your slide 5 then.
Okay,
please.
thank you.
Tabling a budget in global pandemic.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry for those watchers. We're still learning our technology. So again, the second line, healthcare spending, a record 23 billion. This is up about $900 million, or an increase of 4% from the previous year. And that doesn't include an additional 1.25 billion specifically for battling the pandemic, whether that's for PPE spending or on vaccines itself. We've allocated an additional 1.25 billion on top of that $23 billion to adjust for this response and an ongoing challenge of the pandemic. Now we'll just jump back up to that first line, the post-secondary funding. The reason I have this in there is in the full budget, one of the most challenging areas for us in Lethbridge, and one I've had to address a number of times, is our challenging reduction in spending on our post-secondary institutions. As you all know, Lethbridge has not only a university, but a college, and these are challenging times for them and challenging times for all of us, where some of us would say that we have an overall job to work on our budget and bring our spending in line. This has been a particularly challenging ministry for me and for me as a Conservative, as it has a major impact in Lethbridge. And I just wanted to address that. The U of L, for instance, has seen a reduction this year of $5.7 million. But inside of that, they also saw an increase of maintenance dollars of 2.8 million and an increase of research dollars of 1.8 million. So what they really need, because they have quite a new campus and quite an upgraded campus with not just the destination building, but many of the residences have been upgraded over the past 5 or 6 years. So more maintenance dollar may not be where they could utilize those dollars most effectively. So I've been fighting for their ability to have flexibility to adjust that as they transition to the new reality post-pandemic and with the new budgets. They also, as a quick note, they also received just over $21 million for upgrading their boilers. Many of you may know, many of you may not, that they had boilers that were going on 50 years of life span and about 15 years over their dedicated capacity. So I was able to advocate for them to get this much needed deferred maintenance dollars to see those things upgraded to get them more efficient and save them the risk of having a boiler go down in a winter at some point in time. So that's why I really continue to advocate for their flexibility to be able to utilize the dollars that they have in the most pressing areas for their programming and their move forward. I also fight for their ability to find private and other commercial access to dollars and supports and other opportunities. They've been incredibly progressive and forward thinking. I spend a lot of time working with Dr. Mike Mann, who's the president of the university, and his staff and some of their senior administrators as they work to continue to be one of the best universities in Canada and North America, and find a way that utilizes their dollars to the best advantage for them to provide the services that they want to provide for students and keep attracting top level students and doing research, as well as that incredible impact they have on our community. I want to acknowledge the Lethbridge College, that they have similar challenges. Their numbers are slightly different and slightly less, but they too face these challenges, and Dr. Paula Burns and her staff have been incredible to work with. They have just taken the bull by the horns, so to speak, and really worked to work with their budgets, work with available dollars, and provide incredible and increased programming, and utilizing their new building as well to the best advantage for all of those in Southern Alberta. And I really do look forward to their leadership on research and agricultural funding, which is key in our strategic investment and our strategic response to diversifying our economy here in Alberta. And they are leaders in the province and the country. So next, we have on here the continuing fight against COVID. That again is that $1.25 billion. We'll go into a little bit more depth later on with slides on where we're at with active case numbers, as well as where we're at with vaccines and what that means for us here in Lethbridge. When I talk about the last bullet point, getting healthcare spending back on track, it's basically what I'm talking about specifically is the increased funding that we have on Alberta's surgical initiative. One of the negative byproducts of this pandemic is there have been many surgeries over the past 13 months that have been delayed or pushed back, and we have to find a way of addressing this backlog. So we've added $120 million for some of the infrastructure required to address that. But also there will be some of the $1.25 billion will be allocated to address this surgical backlog. So again, there will be a use on some independent facilities, but all funding will remain public. So whether your surgery actually takes place in the hospital or an independent facility, it's still public healthcare paid for by public dollars to address a public need, which is that surgical backlog. One of the other items under that getting healthcare spending back on track has to do with our continuing care capacity, with building new buildings, new facilities, and expanding the number of long-term and dementia care beds in some of those existing buildings. This continuing care, community care, and long-term care portion of that healthcare budget is $3.5 billion to recognize that as our population ages, they're going to need these spaces. And I think we have seen how critical addressing our community and continuing care spaces in their care, in how our service providers have to be very, very careful of traveling between multiple facilities, addressing that, and making sure that they are prioritized in our vaccine rollout is so important, so that we can really make sure that we don't have to have any more deaths due to whatever the case may be, particularly this pandemic at this time, than we absolutely have to. Annalise, next slide, please, and we'll just double check that we're on the same slide. Is this the plan forward job creation strategic investment? Excellent. Thank you very much. So this is some of the exciting part for me, and what I was talking about earlier about the strategic investment. One of the things when we looked at restarting the economy, obviously buzzwords from many governments around the country and for many years has been about diversity. One of the benefits of Lethbridge is that we have not seen the ups and downs because we're not an oil and gas based economy. We're much more a agricultural based economy. So being able to speak to strategic investments that support that kind of growth, things like the highway through twinning between Taber and Burdett, though it's not within the city limits of Lethbridge, You can see how that adds safety and transport to our food processing facilities, of which we have many, whether it's potatoes or sugar beets or canola or numbers and numbers of products. We've added dollars to our Lethbridge Airport, not just to the terminal, but to the runway. And this will also increase business access, and hopefully we will become a link for further reaching into the markets south of us into the United States. Those two things work really, really closely together, trucking and airline freight shipping. The business aspect of it is probably where we'll see the first uptake at our airport, followed by increased travelers at some point in the future. And then, of course, Exhibition Park, the $27.8 million for our Exhibition Park, Exolution. That building is ongoing. It's exciting to watch that take place. And that will really transform that entire east end of Henderson Lake. Again, highlighting how important our agricultural and food production sector are to Lethbridge and Southern Alberta. The last one that I've got is standalone investment is the irrigation investment. There was $815 million plus $10 million for maintenance for developing and growing our irrigation system. Currently, we have 8,000 kilometers of canals and water pipelines in Southern Alberta, just an incredible amount. And we're going to add to that, adding up to, and maybe even over 200,000 more acres of irrigated land. And we already are home of 70% of all of Canada's irrigated land. Just an incredible amount of irrigation and technology, and it increases our crop production by an incredible amount. So seeing us add to that will put further emphasis on innovation and technology for efficient use of that water. So we're not just using more water, we are using the water we have more effectively. And I'm really excited about this. Highway 3 and the irrigation investments in particular are two of the main requirements that we've heard from private industry for their furthered investment in this area. So we are continuing to attract private dollars to this marketplace with not just French fries and potato chips, but also sugar and a number of other products. Those four are our topics, the top picks for us down here in Southern Alberta and Lethbridge. The last three, diversifying our energy industry, is more provincial. So hydrogen, the transition to hydrogen as a fuel of the future is very exciting. We can see that as a part of our natural gas vision and strategy moving forward. So we are investing in large-scale hydrogen production and carbon capture, utilization and storage. I think this is really important as we lower greenhouse gases with this initiative. And many of you may have seen the article earlier this week on Ballard Industries, that hydrogen as a fuel is becoming more and more a reality and not just a future dream. So we are really excited about this market. The Hydrogen Council of Canada estimates that by 2050, the global hydrogen sector could generate $2.5 trillion per year. And with that, obviously, quite a number of jobs and quite likely a transition away from oil and gas dependency to other fuels. The second line item there is small modular nuclear reactors, of which I'm very excited about because we've had a lot of advocacy from two members here in Lethbridge who are retired nuclear engineers. Cosmos Vostunis and Dwayne Pendergast both are part of our community. They have worked in the nuclear field for many years, and they really brought this to my attention and helped me bring that to the forefront for Alberta as a way, again, for our oil and gas industry to switch away from burning dirty natural gas in their requirement for heat and energy to heat the oil to pump it through pipelines, to utilizing small modular reactors to do that heat generation. That has several positive results. The most important is, again, reducing our greenhouse gas emissions almost overnight. because most of the production greenhouse gas emissions come from burning that dirty natural gas, which they would stop in the ability to generate this heat from small modular reactors. The second benefit is that one of the byproducts of these reactors is hydrogen, which can be, again, flowing into that transition from oil and gas to hydrogen. And just exciting developments. The projection on some of these actually being in place are as close as 2026, so a mere 5 years away, where once this kind of technology was looked at 20 and 30 and 50 years down the road, it's really exciting that we're now talking in less than a decade, half a decade, and possibly even sooner. One of the things that I learned through my study of this topic is that Canada is one of 6 nations in the world with the technology to do this, which was mind-blowing to me. It's not just the United States, the United Kingdom, it's Canada. We are one of the global leaders on nuclear technology. And one of the reasons is we have an incredible safety record as well. One of the concerns I've heard is what happens if a nuclear reactor was to melt down, like in Russia, Chernobyl, or in Japan that we saw quite a number of years ago. Canada's technology doesn't use that same base technology. It's a very different technology where if there's a malfunction or a heating of the core, it automatically shuts down so that they can't have that kind of reaction. And it's just really exciting to see that Canada is one of the global leaders in this kind of technology. The last one is wind energy. Obviously, in southern Alberta, we know all about the wind and realize those impacts on us daily. That has been captured. According to the Canadian Wind Energy Association, Alberta now ranks 3rd in Canada with installed wind energy capacity of 1,685 megawatts. So obviously that wind generation is concentrated in the southern part of our province. And then we have the challenge of transmission lines. But again, this kind of diversity in our energy production, as well as solar, that's not on there, but I might add that solar is also seeing a major increase in investment by private investors around the world into southern Alberta. And a benefit of solar is that can be placed right at the place where you need it most, on your factory or your building and that kind of thing. So again, I'm very excited about this kind of diversity, not just into our whole economy, but particularly for our energy industry, so we can be pursuing things that stabilize our economy away from the cyclical nature of oil and gas. Annalise, we'll change topics and jump to the next slide, please. So this is a bit of an abrupt change. Sorry, this is probably my newness to this and how the topics flow, but we're going to talk a little bit about COVID numbers. And the reason I have this graph here, I'll take a little bit of time and pause, is that initially when COVID began last March, many of you will remember, we didn't know what we were facing. There's great concerns about the impact on all of us as Albertans. How would this spread? How does it go through what numbers are we going to see? How do we predict that? And we've come a long way. We've learned a lot over the last 12 months. And while the COVID case numbers can be more of an attraction because they're larger numbers, I believe that as of today or a couple days ago in the province, we just crested 20,000 active cases. The reason I didn't want to focus on that is, again, over time, as we've seen vaccines be introduced this year, we are starting to see a decoupling of the active case numbers and our hospitalization rate, and then secondarily our ICU numbers, which is what's shown here in the screen. And really, the government of Alberta has the responsibility to protect public health and protect and manage our public health care system. So while active case numbers do tell a part of the story and are important, particularly early on, they set an indicator because there's a very stable ratio between the active case numbers and how many ended up in hospital and then how many ended up in ICU. at which for most of last year, we saw for every 1,000 cases, roughly 30 people would end up in hospital, and of that, 3 or 4 would end up in ICU and 1 or 2 would die. That was fairly stable for most of last year. As we introduced vaccines this year, and as we had what is termed natural immunity for those who had COVID and recovered, we start to see that decoupling. So now the number of people, active cases, does not necessarily mean a static and constant number going to hospitals, ICU, and then unfortunately dying. And that's why I chose to focus on the ICU numbers. The large blue on the right-hand side of that pie graph, 145, is all of Alberta. This lighter blue number in the top left-hand corner is our South Zone, 11 ICU members. Lethbridge Hospital, to my understanding, has 14 ICU beds, 9 which have been allocated to COVID, and 5 which have been allocated to other intensive care requirements. The other 2 ICU beds are in Medicine Hat. So you can see we're pretty maxed on that, and that's where it has impact on other care. And that's why I think that's an important slide to show. Next slide, please, Annalise. So this shows COVID numbers and vaccines immunization data as of a couple of days ago, April 27th. And thank you, Annalise. So as of that time, we had administered 1.478 million doses of COVID vaccine throughout Alberta. This means that 26.7% of the population has received at least 1 dose, which is just partial. And we do want to see everybody get their second dose, and 6.3% of the population being fully immunized. That's why it's so important to see that vaccine rate and those COVID numbers, to know where we're going with that, because it has impact on the overall case numbers. It has an impact on our hospitalizations and the ICUs and deaths. And we really want to see that continue as we move forward through this summer. The projections are by the end of June, we should have the vaccines available to get everybody in Canada vaccinated at least once, and many, many more vaccinated for a second time. And these are positive numbers as we see that. Last slide, please, Annalise. All of that to say on COVID numbers and vaccines is how we're doing here in Lethbridge and area. If you'll see the chart there, the percent of individuals with 1 dose, if you go all the way down to the bottom, the South Zone, of which we are part, we're about 28% of all individuals in Lethbridge and area having received 1 dose. That's second only in the entire province. And then on the right-hand side, the individuals that are fully immunized, we're leading the province at 7.8%. A lot of this is because of our population mix. We have many seniors as a retirement community. We have a great number of incredible healthcare workers, and we have a significant population of First Nations individuals, all of which were high priority to receive vaccines very early on. And that priority list was based on, number 1 priority were those who were most at risk for severe outcomes to catching COVID or death. The second was healthcare workers, and the third is those who are working in highly dense and populated sites, as we've seen this week with meat packing facilities getting those vaccinations. And I hope to see teachers added to that list very, very shortly, because of their work centers being amongst many, many people in a smaller area. So very pleased that Lethbridge and area is doing so well on that vaccination rollout. And one other bit of good news is that easing of restrictions on care homes and senior living facility. Because we were able to vaccinate so many of them, we have heard from many, many residents here in Lethbridge that they wanted to be able to see more family. At their time in life, family is an incredibly important source of encouragement and a big part of their lives. So because we have that safety achieved for so many of them, we've seen that increased number of, sorry, I'm just looking for my notes on that. I can't find them right now, but we're just seeing that increased number visitors from 2 to 4 for internal and inside visiting. And then externally, we've seen that number go from 5 to 10, also a little bit more achievable as we have nice weather coming around now instead of just the cold and wind that we have experienced it even as up until last week. So with all of that, I think there's some very positive news as we continue to roll out. I do think that we're close to the end, but we still need to be aware of social distancing, hand washing, wearing masks, being aware of others, and making sure that we are doing what we can to protect not only our family and loved ones, but other people in our community. With that, Annalise, I think I have come through my notes. I hope I've caught everything, and I hope I made sense to those listening. A lot of information there. Happy to answer some questions, and I will pass the mic back to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nathan, for that presentation. We have, as we assumed, a lot of questions, so I will jump right in. Our first question comes from Laurie Schultz. The infection rate, IR, in brackets, is 9.9%. I'm delaying hiring a plumber and appliance repair as it isn't safe to have anybody in my home at 9.9% IR. The strategy to keep businesses open has backfired. Is the UCP's lack of reasonable health measures taking this reality into account when trying to help businesses survive and recover post-pandemic?
Yeah, great question. Thank you for that. Yeah, that infection rate is very critical, and this has been the challenge all along. And I probably should have mentioned it in one of our issues facing Alberta coming out of the pandemic and that recovery is how do we manage businesses and manage this infection rate? One of the greatest challenges that I believe we faced is that we have seen most infections transmission and the spread happen at private social functions and not at businesses or places of work in general. That's not every place, but I think there's a general understanding that transmission happens most where you have a large concentration of people in a smaller area, and many businesses operate with only 1 or 2 people in a smaller space. So that has really been minimized. We haven't seen the transmission happen as much there. And it is a challenge to any government to how do you restrict people to what they do in their private and personal space as opposed to business space. So we have seen some of the economic plan and recovery for small and medium businesses. I believe it is now at about $30,000 to help them, as well as deferred all WCB costs over the past year and for the next year, and as well as some other utility rates. But that has been a challenge. I don't believe there's any government that can fully replace the income that a business can generate on their own with any type of subsidy. It's partial at best. So that is, how do we find a path forward that allows businesses to open and begin to generate that income while still maintaining safety? And that is a grave concern that we continue to try to address and adjust and seek a better answer to. Thank you.
Our next question comes from Timothy from the Lethbridge Herald. When faced with such numbers, you have 2 choices: make cuts or raise revenues. You can only cut so much before impacting vital services. When will the UCP start seriously considering a PST? And then as a follow-up, saying a referendum is needed is facetious. There has been no referendums on other cuts and measures taken by the government. Someone needs to take the political hit for the greater good of Alberta.
Really good point, Timothy. Thank you for that. Yeah, I've heard lots of calls for a provincial sales tax, and I think we're facing a crossroads as a province that we will have to address that head on. You're right. I believe that there will be some referendum questions this fall at the municipal elections. I don't have the list of what those questions all are. So we will address that through cabinet as we get closer to that, the public will be made aware. But what I have heard from you and from others in Lethbridge that I'm taking back is I believe that we are facing a need to look at our entire tax regime, including a provincial sales tax, and seeing how does that get adjusted into the mix. I don't believe that it's as simple as just adding that tax. I believe we need to consider the federal carbon tax as a part of that mix. I believe that we need to look at how taxation has impacted our most vulnerable, our seniors and those on fixed incomes. And that's why I have taken this message, and what I believe is we need to do a full tax review for the whole of the spectrum, and not just one piece of it in the provincial sales tax. I think you've acknowledged that it's a very contentious issue, and there are those who support it and those who oppose it. So I think that's why I believe that the best path forward is to review the entire taxation regime, so that it can be a component and developed in recognition of some of these other layers of taxation that we face. And hopefully that answers your question, Timothy.
Our next question comes from Davey Wiggers. With COVID spending setting economic records, what are the UCP's plans to address the debt and deficit? How do economic projections of Alberta leading the nation in post-pandemic government affect government's policy?
Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate that question. So it is an incredible challenge, as we saw in our earlier slides, the debt and deficit. And where there are incredible tensions between how do you address that, there is a general desire to see Alberta governments move towards balanced budgets. In the middle of the pandemic is not the time to do so, as we need those services, and many of those services, like health, we need them even more. So our best plan forward, in my opinion, is that we look to that economic recovery. And I think that's why I favored very strategic economic development and growth and diversity. I'm very pleased with the investment into our agricultural sector down here in Lethbridge, and seeing all those pieces play roles together, from research at the university and college, to production with irrigation, to transportation with highway investment and our airport, and the exhibition to highlight the need for that and attract further business and private investment in showcasing our abilities. And as we see that recovering a balanced spending and a balanced approach moving forward, one of the strategies that we saw in that direction is that some of our budgets, we pulled outlier years in our budget. We pulled the same funding, but we pulled it earlier, so that while those monies are invested this year, we haven't, over a 3-year period, we haven't really allocated excessive increase in dollars. And we've allowed for the benefits of that build and construction and development over the next 2 years to sort of balance out those lesser dollars in the outlier years as a strategy. And then for recovery, I'm really thrilled that it does look like Alberta will lead the country, and in my belief that Lethbridge will also lead Alberta in economic growth in the years ahead and that economic recovery. But it does need to be noted that we are also starting from the back. We saw the greatest challenge to our economy with a drop in revenues, so we have the greatest to catch up. But I am hopeful that we will lead the country as a province, and some bright spots in terms of our film and tech industry, as well as some diversity in our energy industry that we talked about earlier. And of course, our food and agricultural production has been very, very stable and growing in the past couple of years.
Excellent, thank you. Just a reminder for everybody, I'm only entertaining one of your questions, and only will ask your second question at the end if we have time. I'm also not going to read out your comments. There seems to be a lot of comments on the nuclear element, but there is a question by Bev Mundell. So I'll read the question, but I won't be reading all the comments on the whole nuclear or on any of them. Small modular reactions have the same problem as any size nuclear reactor. how to dispose of the, and then in quotations, heavy water created, and how to dispose of the nuclear waste at the end of its life. And I see that
Mhm.
Cosmos is on here, and he's answered some of these, but I think the question was posed to you, so I'll leave it to you to.
There we go. Hopefully, I've learned enough from Cosmos to answer that question, but it is challenging. He is more of an expert than I am.
Yeah, and
But
he
Bev,
is on the chat, and he has answered some of this. But yeah, go ahead.
excellent. So thank you, Bev. Very good questions, and some of that technical answer is beyond my full understanding, but that is a challenge. From the first part, from what I understand, is that as a nuclear reactor, I think it has a general lifespan of about 20 years. Over that 20 years, it actually only uses about 3% of the nuclear core before it's depleted below the point of use, at which point it can be taken out and recharged. So we're only talking about a very, very small portion of that reactive material needing to be recovered and restored. There are a number of different ideas that have been put forward to utilize or to protecting and salvaging that waste, whether it's buried in bunkers, concrete lined, all that. And I do appreciate the concern about what if it leaches or breaks through those defenses. Um, and I don't have the technical ability to answer all of those questions, but I do want you to acknowledge you that they are part of that conversation from the training and research I've taken with the Canadian Nuclear Research Institute. It's one of the constant themes of discussion, and there is a weighing of the benefit of green energy for 20 years and the the detraction from that is what do we do with this heavy water and this nuclear waste? I appreciate that's probably not a full answer for you, Bev, but I will try to get some more details on that part of it as I move forward.
Okay, and our next question comes from Mike McGuire, and I'm going to combine that with somebody else's question. What is your opinion on coal mining in the Rockies? What efforts are you taking to keep our water supply safe? And I'm going to combine that with this question. Further metallurgic coal exploration will inevitably result from contamination downstream. Won't this hurt our reliance on irrigation as well as carrying a heavy economic burden in the future?
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to combine those questions.
Thanks, Annalise. Yeah, thank you for those questions. Yeah, that is uh, that is a great concern. So I'll just take a step back because it is a complex issue in the sense that um, mines proposed for the Crow's Nest Pass area that have been in development for 6 years or so have particularly Grassy Mountain is now in the purview and governance of not just the Alberta Energy Regulator, but the federal energy regulator, and before the federal Minister of Environment. So the federal government will make the final decision on whether those coal mines in that area, particularly Grassy Mountain, move forward. And some of those mines are also on Category 4 lands where that development is allowable under the current coal policy. So some of the ability to speak to stopping that development, those windows have passed to many degrees, and there is no vote in the Alberta legislature on those passing of coal mines. And I'm just saying that as a context. So where I have made my position clear is I too am very concerned about the water and water resources for Lethbridge. And I've publicly stated and clearly stated that I cannot sacrifice Lethbridge and area's prominent and primary resource, which is food and food production, agriculture based, for another industry in another area. This is of constant concern. And I bring forward to the Minister of Energy and the Ministry of Environment, while I do seek technologies that could help mitigate that. The fact is that mining does use water, and mining will result in contaminants in that water. So I'm very concerned and speaking for the protection of those resources and wanting to make sure that we have not just a coal policy, but water and land reclamation and land use policies that also balance the responsible development of metallurgical coal with other resources and developments. So I've written articles about that. I've taken letters and debate to both of those ministers on a number of occasions. I will make sure that those in Lethbridge and area, when the full consultation on the coal policy comes forward, everybody in Lethbridge will have that opportunity to share their thoughts, and they will be able to bring forward their concerns about water and land use to that, while it is a panel set to discuss the coal policy. Specifically, impacts to water can be made and heard in that conversation and should be raised appropriately at that time. And hopefully, thank you, Annalise, and thank them for those questions.
Okay, our next question comes from Henny Mundo. With apparently all water in southern Alberta allocated by licenses, where is the water from the 200,000 acres to come from?
Yeah, a very good question. And this is why I did allude to it a little bit at the time about technology and the efficiency of use of water. Much of that irrigation water, from my understanding and my research, once it's been applied to the land, also runs off and goes back into catchment basins and back ultimately into rivers. So if we're going to increase the number of acres provided, we also have to increase the efficiency of the water put on there. I've done some research and spent some time with some of our local irrigation experts in the private industry, and the efforts that they're going to provide their clients with technologies that really reduce the amount of water used in the first place. It's more targeted, less overland flood irrigation, of which there is still some, and to make sure that we use what we have as effectively as possible. I've also spent some time with the Old Man Watershed Council, and Shannon, sorry, her last name escapes me right now. Shannon Frank is an incredible resource and an incredible advocate for helping me understand that it's not just the volume of water, it's also when that water is taken, as rivers would have high and low peak seasons. So that's where off-stream and on-stream water storage is becoming even more essential, whether it's private dugouts or whether it's larger reservoirs, that kind of thing. And that water management has to be a major topic. So you are absolutely right that we cannot allocate any further water there. We have to capture any water that has been underutilized or increase our technology. And many of our providers think that there's a huge amount of efficiency to be captured there, and something that we have to be extremely aware of as well. Thanks for that great question.
Okay. Maria, I believe that the question has already been answered regarding, I'll read it out anyway, but what have you said, this is Maria Fitzpatrick, what have you said to your government to stop the coal mining on the eastern slopes to protect our water supply? I think you've answered that in the previous section, but this next part, I'm not, well, yeah, there's another part. Also impacting irrigation given the changes to water licenses.
Right. So I will just, I think Maria Fitzpatrick makes an important distinction between the potential coal mines in the Crow's Nest Pass on Category 4 and the eastern slopes, which is Category 2. So I, again, have spoken very loudly to the Minister of Energy and the Minister of Environment that Lethbridge residents, by and large, do not support open pit coal mining on the eastern slopes. And we cannot sacrifice our primary industry of agriculture and food production in Lethbridge for industry other places. That has to be balanced. And part of the strategic diversity of the province in Lethbridge and area is agriculture, and we can't see that put to risk. So that has been my public presentation on that part. And then again, with the water use, Annalise, can you just ask that second part again? Right. So water licenses, as in my understanding, and I may not have this perfectly clear, can be purchased on a commodities market. So if I believe there's different designations. There's rancher usage, there's agricultural usage, there's industry usage. So where the full volume does not change, individual licensees may sell portions or whole parts of their individual license, and I believe that's actively traded. So, but I do not believe that if water is allocated for agriculture, it can be changed to industrial or vice versa. I think those allocations stay fixed, where if one industrial user has not been using their water license or a portion thereof, they can sell part or whole of it to another industrial user, but they cannot sell it outside of that category. That may be imperfect. If I've got that wrong, I apologize. If any of my staff is listening, we will look into that a little bit more closely. But I believe those are the rules on allocation and licenses within that.
Okay. Our next question comes from Trevor Page. Agriculture is the mainstay of the economy in southern Alberta, yet it is the major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. Do you believe this is a serious issue? And if so, what should we be doing in Lethbridge East to reduce our carbon footprint?
Really great question. Yes, some of those. I mean, we're in Feedlot Alley, and I think we all recognize that they are a major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. The challenge there, it's not like an industry where you can put a filter on it or something like that, as these are animals walking around. But yes, I believe it is a serious issue that we need to try to address. I think that's why I'm very interested in the carbon capture proposals that have been up north. I know they have a primary focus on the energy sector up north to capture that carbon there, but I am interested into how we can utilize some of that technology down here in the South Zone in that agricultural variety. I know many farmers have been investigating and researching crops. Different crops have different carbon capture capabilities. And to make sure that we maximize that. And then here in Lethbridge East, as we're an urban center, we have to be aware of how we have our carbon footprint as well. And I'm very excited. Many of our manufacturing and industrial business partners in the north side have done a huge amount of effort by converting their factory rooftops to solar in that direct effort. And I hope that is one simple way. Obviously, we've got to do more. And I am very hopeful that technology will become more and more available for more and more of us to take those steps in an important way. And one of the things that I'm curious about is our waste. I mean, at the other end, particularly plastic waste in our landfills and that kind of thing. How do we do a better job of that? And maybe if we can reduce our plastic packaging and its production at the front end, we can see that greenhouse gas emission reduction as well. So just a couple of efforts more to do and more to research and learn on, but a great question.
Excellent. Our next question comes from David Major. Funds from the sale of non-renewable resources should not be used for general revenue. It should be preserved in the Heritage Trust Fund. Revenue to meet government expenses should come from taxes. Would you agree that if we had stuck with the original plan as Norway has, and then in brackets Peter Lougheed's Heritage Trust Fund, that the current budget crisis would not exist?
Really good questions. I don't know that I can definitively answer that one way or another, but I believe that if governments had utilized that fund more effectively over the past 40 or 50 years, yes, we would probably be in a much better situation. The challenges are obviously that we have to replace that $7 billion a year in income with other things. Taxes is one. From my understanding and research, for every 1% provincial tax, about $1 billion is generated. So that would be about a 7% tax to make up the fullness thereof. And I don't know if that's a perfect solution. I think I would say that it would take a little bit of both, right? Reduce spending and increase taxation. You have to do a little bit of both. I don't think there's any such thing as a one perfect solution to any problem. And I believe I said earlier that I do think that we need to look at our entire taxation protocols and the entire system to see how we can integrate that in the most effective way, being particularly careful for those who are on fixed incomes, our seniors and those who have other inhibitors to full economic growth. So I think this is a discussion that Alberta needs to have and will have for years coming ahead. And I am hesitant to say that there's any perfect solution. But yes, hindsight's 2020, and I think we all acknowledge it, that there's things that we could all have done better in the past to have left us in a better situation today. But our job is to take the ball today and move forward and find solutions moving forward. But I think you've raised some good points there.
Our next question comes from Sean Leclerc. I've heard it recently stated that of all the provinces, Alberta is set to be the leader in economic recovery. Can you discuss the factors that make this statement a reality?
Sure. Thanks very much for the question. I think there's a number of things that we did to begin with, and I believe our mandate and election was much more simple before the pandemic, where we wanted to become a very competitive jurisdiction. And I think we all understand that there is a global market, and we have some very strong competitors to the south of us, but as well as overseas. So we sought to try to find that balance of business attraction and reinvestment. And many of those initiatives began prior to the pandemic. With the pandemic, a lot of those things were interrupted, and we've had to readjust and pivot. And now we've had to add countercyclical spending to the government's books, which has pros and cons. Pros in that we can strategically invest into much needed infrastructure to further attract private business, which I think I described earlier here in the south. But overall, we'll also see that up north as we reclaim abandoned oil wells, as we convert many of those abandoned oil wells to geothermal energy and very greenhouse gas friendly. We've sought to attract much more tech business and TV and film business to Alberta. I think this year we've seen the most growth in that sector ever. I think it's something around $200 million. Please don't quote me on that. A lot of numbers in my head today, but I believe the previous year was something like $20 million new investment in a year, and we're something like 10 times that, just roughly, in the TV and film sector to attract that business and growth. And interestingly enough, the intention is more on TV series than on film. Film are major productions. They have a very short film span, typically 3 to 5 months in a location, and then they go somewhere else. Whereas TV, they come, they set up production, and they're here year over year, so they have a much larger investment overall into the segment. It's set designers, food and clothing, accommodations, and production studios, that kind of thing. And the other part of that would also be our gaming industry. One of the things I've learned in the past 2 years is that our Lethbridge College in virtual reality is a global leader in their technology there and in that course and training. It's one of the first in all of North America to teach that virtual reality for added technology to home design, building design, real estate, and a number of other factors, as well as to actual gaming. And I am hopeful that we continue to attract those kind of gaming headquarters here to not just Alberta, but southern Alberta in Lethbridge and area to set up shop and get our youth to work in a budding and burgeoning new industry. So all of those things lead to our strengths in Alberta, where we have one of the youngest populations in Canada. We have a very educated population in Canada. We're blessed in Lethbridge to have a university and college that add to that. And as they come to our university and college from sometimes not just across the country, but around the globe, the intent is to attract them to stay here in business. And I think as we see that, those are the factors that lead us to that economic growth that we're hoping for, and having that positive population growth, positive economic and secondary economic growth. But again, one of the caveats is we can see great growth, but we have to remember that we're starting from the back of the pack. So we need that growth to catch up and again lead the country overall in total jobs. And I think we've got some bright spots in a number of industries to help us to do that.
Okay, our last question of the day comes from Barb Phillips. How are you advocating for the Lethbridge Downtown Business Core, the businesses and the owners who have faced much adversity from the pandemic, as well as the houseless and drug crisis in part caused by the closing of Arches SCS and wraparound services?
Yeah, no, great questions. Thank you for that. So it began with having a mobile SCS to still make sure that we have that service there. But I have advocated strongly for the additional services in recovery. So we've seen a huge investment in Southern Alberta of, I believe, $5 million in Lethbridge and $5 million just east to us in Standoff for those treatment and recovery beds. We have something like a 40-bed unit of extended supportive housing. That project is proceeding in North Lethbridge. We have a 64-bed senior and continuing care independent living for some of that supportive living, low-income housing initiative being brought to South Lethbridge. We're trying to add those wraparound services where not only can we reach those who are caught in mental health and addictions right away out of the gate with additional beds at their needs and services, the SCS included, but then we want to take them to recovery and treatment. And we've allocated a lot of money. Lethbridge is one of the communities that per capita, we receive more funding for those wraparound and supportive services than anywhere else in the province. And we want to continue to see that. So we have a continuum of care from where they're caught in addiction to being able to safely utilize their addiction, but find the resources to get them to treatment and care. And there are so many incredible partners in Lethbridge that work with that. The Canadian Mental Health Agency, Lethbridge Family Services, Lethbridge Children's Service. There's just so many of those partners to try to create a comprehensive care to capture all of them. And then for the businesses downtown, this is where I think we talked at the beginning of it, a little bit of the balance between restrictions that manage outbreaks and the rise in numbers. Thankfully in Lethbridge, we've seen those numbers coming down for the past week or two, but allow each of those independent businesses open in a safe way where they're protecting their clients, their customers, their staff, but also being open for business so they can provide those supports that are needed and add to that economic development. But another great question. Thank you very much, Annalise.
Excellent. So this wraps up our session. We have a lot of thank yous in the queue. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your informative presentation from Violet Makema, from Beth Mundell, from Laurie Schultz. Before we wrap up, Nathan, do you have a take-home message for our viewers?
Sure. I would just like to thank everybody for their respectful questions. These are some really challenging times and some challenging issues. One of the things I love about Lethbridge is its diversity in so many ways. We have a very broad spectrum of population, and everybody has a unique and independent view. to try to manage to respectfully hear from all of those different views in a comprehensive way is a challenge. And I acknowledge that humbly, that sometimes I do it better than others, but I do try. And I really enjoyed these challenging questions to try to represent them well, to try to give them the information and respect that they deserve. I am excited about Lethbridge's future immediately. In this summer, looking ahead, I am thrilled that Lethbridge is a leader in the province in terms of vaccinations. I'm pleased that our numbers are going counter trend and they're going down because people have taken it upon themselves to be very careful with that. I am excited about the diversity of our economy and our business owners here and across Southern Alberta in what they will do for our recovery. And just a quick mention of our construction industry as well, how well they have added to our economic recovery, and all of our public health staff down here, from our nurses and our public health nurses and people, our doctors. They have just done a tremendous job of caring for our citizens. And I think we're going to have better days ahead. I know it's hard. Please hang on there. I think we're very, very close to having a terrific summer here in Southern Alberta. I look forward to good weather, easing of restrictions so that we can all get back to the things we love and enjoy. I'm a hugger, so I look forward to being able to hug many of you when I see you next in a safe and COVID-friendly way. And again, I just very much appreciate this conversation today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you for your time here at SECPA. Before we wrap up the session, please join us next week, Thursday, with Jackie Fenske, who is the acting leader of the Alberta Party. The need for more voices in public sphere for Alberta. And with that, we hope to see you next week. Have a good week, everybody.